So I would like to start by thanking you for the honor of being here. And I'd like to take advantage of the fact that I'm the director of the nursing school. And I'd like to wish you all a very nice welcome to the nursing school, even though it's virtually. And I'd like to say that it's a great honor to have this opportunity to have this partnership and offer this moment of thinking about ethics and the family and talking to nurses around the world and provide this opportunity specifically for the people in Brazil who are not able to go with us many times because of the language. So that's why I'm doing this presentation in Portuguese, and then you will have translation into English. But you have my welcome, and please feel welcome by the nursing school in Brazil. This is an image of our school, just so you feel part of it. And we're here in Brazil trying to follow up this symposium, and this is the opening. And we have Professor Kim and Professor Janet here with us, and it's a great pleasure to have them with us today from Family Nursing. I have no disclosures for this presentation, and I prepared a few objectives so that we can discuss this in my time, and I'd like to explore the challenges and opportunities about teaching ethics that involve family nursing. Also reflect upon the teaching objectives of family ethics in undergrad and post-graduation courses in nursing, and also present strategies in the curriculum or the syllabus for nursing. So talking a little bit about the concepts, I know that I have to talk about education, but since we're all talking about ethics and bioethics, I thought it was interesting to bring these initial concepts, and maybe they're going to be a little more aligned with everyone. So ethics and bioethics and their emergence and the context in which they emerge. So it is a field of knowledge that came up as an attempt to respond to the changes and the challenges in the 20th century, individually, collectively, and also in the environment. And within this context, bioethics allows us to rethink the values and the moral concepts that we have in this area specifically. When we relate the family to these values, probably this comes up with the different situations, but with the evolution, the 20th century, we are talking about abortion, we're talking about reproductive technologies, the donation of organs and tissues, the allocation of healthcare resources for the elderly, for vulnerable people, and sexual education, contraception, and teenagers, end of life, and genetics. So these points, this will be highlighted for us for our presentation here. And how about the education and ethics? Education is extremely important for nurses' education. So they will know the ethics code for the profession, and they will also develop abilities and knowledge in decision-making when there are conflicts in the environment, and also the rights of the patients and the family. And bioethics induces reflection that stimulates the resolution of the conflicts. And this is individually as well as collectively in all of the different areas of professional action. In terms of teaching, we should incorporate something that allows for ethical and moral behavior for students as people. So in the individual dimension and also their own social dimension. So this is part of a family that brings their experience and also as a family and as a student in nursing, as well as in the healthcare area. For us to be able to evolve in this discussion, we bring you some other aspects, some important concepts that are related to this issue of ethics and bioethics. And I'm insisting on the ethics and bioethics because this is very common in Brazil. I don't know how you use it outside Brazil, but we always make this reference and this distinction between ethics and bioethics. So an important concept that we bring to this discussion today is moral conscience, moral awareness or consciousness. And it's important for us to talk about building moral consciousness of a professional as well as of a student. So this can occur through interpretation, where the professionals as students, they recognize the existence of an ethical problem and they consider the need of making a decision according to the professional code of ethics. The objective of the consciousness is to look at the affective and cognitive aspects of thinking about family ethics so that you can develop sensitiveness in terms of ethically challenging situations in their working environments. This means that we already have a great challenge there to reflect upon and then to bring to our discussion the moment. So how do we deal with the different moments of the development of this moral consciousness? So how are we going to stimulate to this moral consciousness to our students? How are we going to deal with these affective and cognitive dimensions and the thought of family ethics? And how are we going to bring this over to our discussion in terms of teaching it? So over here, we're talking about the sensitivity, which is a way for us to develop this moral consciousness, this moral sensitivity that includes the experiences that people have and also personal development of an individual as from their interactions with the families, with the patients, and with the other professionals, and with their own families, their own professors and their mentors, and also creating a constant change process and also cognitive and emotional development throughout their professional lives and throughout their development in terms of being professionals. And the focus of the structure and the sensitivity, this was described Can you hear me? Can I keep going?
Perfeitamente.
We can hear you. All right, so we're bringing you the components of moral sensitivity. They are equally important. So considering this important ability, and we can call that the ability that should be developed by the student, by the professional, so that they will be able to, in the family aspect, help to make ethical and moral decisions and in the management of ethical challenges. So in this item, we have 3 points that are important at this moment, and it's worth specifying each of them so that we are able to make this composition, which is the moral sensitivity. So the first one is the motivation for goodness. This is defined as wanting to do what you want, what is correct, and doing the right thing for the patient, for the family, and for the other person. The second one, The second domain is the spontaneous moral perception, which is actually the ability of the nurse in ethical situations to deal with problems that may come up. So they should pay attention to feelings that they can have that can have an impact over the patients. And moral resilience, that's the third domain. And probably we won't have a lot of time to talk about it, but I think it's important to mention. So that is the capacity of the professional and the student of sustaining or restoring their integrity in response to the complexity that exists in terms of their working environment or the interactions with the families, with the patients in this complexity, moral complexity, and where you have anxiousness and challenges, everyday challenges. And over here, we have this relationship, and we're going to bring you what this would be at this point. Angela, could you turn off your audio, please? Thank you. So over here, the idea is for us to bring together our topics. And this is applied to the care of the family and making this look at the family, not only how we use it in nursing, how we treat the family, and the family means those individuals who have a relationship with the patient, but it's a family also as a peculiar unit that has a social and essential aspect. So it's a key element, not only for the survival of the patients, the individuals, but also for protection, socialization of the family members, of the components. And it's the family that makes this transcription of cultural capital, economic capital, and property of this family group, as well as the gender and solidarity relations of one generation to another inside the family. So this is a very important aspect when we look at this topic of ethics, family ethics. So this sensitivity in nursing and for the family, it is necessary for decision making. It is also necessary for us to understand how to act in an ethical manner and a competent manner for the patients and the families, and the capacity of being morally sensitive so they can actually be very important in nursing towards the family. And it's also important for the graduation or the education of a nurse when they are doing a generalist education. They need to develop these abilities and identify these ethical issues, these ethical and moral issues that involve the process of taking care of the patients, and they protect the interests of the patients. The moral sensitivity, it can be considered a personal and intuitive aspect, or it could be a competence and an essential dimension and in the decision making. So we are trying to look at this in the care that we offer to all of the members and the family as well as a whole. So I'm going to now bring you the experience that we have in Brazil and data about how the health system in Brazil works, so that we can then move on to education and work with the concept that I tried to bring initially, and according to the experience that we have in our educational process when we look at this, especially in the nursing school here at the University of São Paulo. So primary care, healthcare in Brazil is well developed. It is a model for many countries. It has the family inserted in this process, in this care, and trying to put focus on the individual. And this is for something broader. So it brings the concept or the building of an experience of a set of players involved in this care that is offered. And also we have people, people from the community, from the family, they are present. And the main entrance in the system, in the Brazilian healthcare system that is coordinated by this system, it is very good in the sense of addressing and welcoming the family. The family, in fact, in this context, it is the center of attention in healthcare. And we talk about this, and this was reorganized several times, but at this point, it is presented with this name, and it is to improve the healthcare of the population, and it takes the healthcare team inside the family house and looking at this systemically, trying to understand and addressing the family as a whole. Well, so having said that, let us try to go into the topic that I have to talk about at this point, which is teaching family ethics within the different contexts. So what we have seen with regard to bioethics and the teaching of this to the family is that studies show that, in fact, we need to look at the affective and cognitive dimensions of an ethical thought in the patient, in the students, so that they can be sensitive to ethical challenging situations in their professional environment. And when reflecting upon the teaching of ethics and bioethics, we understand that the construction of new knowledge, competence, attitudes, and abilities in the professional exercise of nursing, all of this must be based on theoretical concepts within this area of knowledge, and also the construction of a moral consciousness so that the care of the family and the family members will actually happen in an interactive manner. So how can we make this operational? How can we teach ethics and bioethics? So this has to be linked to all of the different levels of teaching, of nursing. So the bachelor's degree and post-graduation, master's, PhDs, all of them must include this issue of ethics and bioethics, and especially working with self-knowledge, regulation, and professional intelligence of the student and the professional so that they can increase their abilities and their competences for the resolution of conflicts, and especially related to decision making. So it's not a single individual, but how this is going to actually work in the family. So when the family's there, when the family's not there. So that's exactly what appears in the classroom, inside the hospital, in the environment where the patients are seen. So what should we consider in this teaching? So I got this material from the International Code of Ethics for Nurses, and it's very important because we have the ethical codes, and there we see the importance of the nurse. So the nurse is in the middle. You have the individual, the family, the population, the community. These are the center of everything, and that's how they should be when we're teaching family ethics. And then we have clinical practice, the administration, the public policies, education, research, and we're going to talk about them here a little later on. So as from this code, I want to highlight these items that are applied in the elements of code number 1. So nurses and patients are people who require services or care. And in the first item, we have knowing opportunities for teaching and learning. so that ethical principles and reasoning, ethical reasoning and decision making will respect autonomy, and it will be something just. Of course, we all know that already, but how do we take this to the family, to nursing in the family environment? That's our great challenge. So I am going to talk a little bit about these issues that have to do with our experience and talking about all of these recommendations made by the IC. Over here, I bring you some of our experience so that we can start looking at this relationship. And one of the strategies that we use is to show the research. And I would like to highlight the activities that we use using our research. So from the beginning of our research until the analysis that is made, and how we can actually advance in these aspects related to the ethical and moral conflicts that appear inside and outside the family. So how as professionals, but also with the families themselves. So when we got involved, this is the first part of the work that we looked at in the decision making to donate organs of the children. So this is an important decision to make when one of the children in the family and one child that has a brain death. And to make this decision, they talk to the grandparents. Many times they talk to the siblings of this child who is brain dead. And sometimes they need the help of professionals. They need this maturity, this ethical maturity, and this development, moral development, this sensitivity, so that they will be able to help the families in these huge challenges that appear in the different concepts and in what we do. And in parallel to that, we also talk about the expectations of the parents with regards to the healthcare team. When we talk about important decisions, what is the ability of the family? What is the ability of these professionals, of the nurses, so that they can provide support, and how much of their objectives is the same of that family, and each of the members of that family, what they have in terms of making decisions that need to be taken. And if I can actually go back, we have, if they talk about agreeing to donate organs, for example, the grandparents agree, and then we have to deal with these grandparents, and they have to deal with their own decisions as well. And we as professionals, we also have to be there and open to hear about these conflicts and help in the resolution. So these possible interfaces for bioethics at the global level. We have to think not only about this family and what is happening to this family, but also in the possibilities that we have of helping them. But also we have something that calls our attention, these climatic changes in healthcare, for example, and also teaching about the consequence of the climatic changes to healthcare, and being able to support climatic health at the political institutional levels, participating in the development, implementation, and evaluation of new technologies, emerging technologies, including social media, for the education in the public health, and also education about healthcare in the populations. So it looks like this has nothing to do with us in the beginning. The difficulty that we have showing this to the students. But more recently in Brazil, we had a catastrophe, I prefer to call it that way, with the rain. And this actually made us come closer to these climatic changes and what the result of this is, and what the consequences were for these families, and the role of the nursing professionals, the nurses, and this whole team in the community helping to take care, helping in decision making so that they could be safer, and also for them to be cared for physically and emotionally. And then this is what the climatic changes are bringing today. So ICN also has other important topics in terms of ethics and bioethics. It also makes these recommendations, our nursing curriculums, but I also bring the specific experience of the nursing school from the University of São Paulo, and this is what we offer. And it is the group of all these subjects that bring these students close to ethics and bioethics. So we have the evaluation of individuals and families, how we address the family. This is one subject. Then there's also the issue of ethics in terms of legislation, and then introducing bioethics. And also here we have taking care of teenagers, for example. And if you look at the year where it is offered, it covers all of our syllabus. So it's not in the beginning or at the end of this moment that the student is developing their sensitivity towards this process. So we also have others that can talk about this content that we're offering. One has to do with the experience of the person. So they look at the name of the subject. So we talk about the person's experience and the family in this experience of death and bereavement and palliative care. And we also talk about the decision making, and also when we talk about palliative care, these subjects and other subjects as well. And the last one that you can see over here, which is the one of moral distress and others. And it talks about other concepts that we've already discussed. And this appears during the whole period in the graduation, the undergraduation, and graduation process. So we also look at the disease and the family and diseases, and research and context, evidence in terms of palliative care, pediatric palliative care. So all of these moments, we look at ethics and sensitivity and development of these abilities so that we can discuss important issues in decision making. I don't know if I still have a few minutes. Do I still have a few minutes, Mayada? Can I continue? So I would like to share with you our university. It has always made it easy to make robust partnerships with other international universities. And we were very happy to make a great partnership with the University of North Carolina. And as from this experience, I'm going to end my presentation explaining what a unique experience in one subject can allow us to get close to learning about societies and cultures, not only from Brazil, but from around the world, and how we can get close to global content of experience incorporated in the curriculum. And we're going to have inclusive policies as well. And even though we're talking about generalist nurses, now this experience is very important in graduation as well as in post-graduation, when we talk about nursing in the family. But this happened in graduation, and it was the Collaborative International Online COIL, and these are strategies made by the professors in the university, the partnerships they have. They share knowledge, and the students are able to learn the technical abilities that are necessary to be able to share knowledge within the different contexts, the multicultural context, let's call it that. So this experience was a global experience for healthcare students, and they were able to learn about initiatives around the world, and they were able to develop the sense of global citizenship. They appreciated the differences and similarities between the different countries and the different healthcare systems, for example, in the United States. Also learning about the experience of patients and family members with healthcare and disease, knowing the healthcare professionals, the role each one has, how this was done in Brazil, how this was done in the United States. And in one of the opportunities where it was in the middle of the pandemic, so listening to the students discussing the different possibilities and looking at the possibilities for vaccines and the responsibility, the ethical and bioethical responsibility with regard to these decisions. So that was very enriching, not only for the patients, but for the professors. So this increased self-confidence in terms of adversity and inclusion. It was very interesting because our university definitely looks at diversity, and it is a priority. 50% of our students, in terms of positions, we have a distribution that values inclusion, and to be able to offer this to others, to other universities, was very important. And although we are in Brazil, we have some students, for example, from Africa, and these students from Africa that were studying nursing in Brazil, they also came to show their experience in this world of diversity with this connection and with different universities. So Brazil and these other students who were from Africa that were here in Brazil, talking not only about cultural differences or cultural differences that are related to these challenges and issues in healthcare and disease, but also their own challenges, cultural challenges, and living with these students from different parts of the world. So this also allowed for international experience at the graduation level and with a systematic and interactive form of doing it. So these are the pictures. Everything, of course, was done online, but many times we were divided into small groups, and the students interacted a lot and discovered things, things like favorite food, what these families eat, how we can help, what is the context of the situation, until they have to make a decision for certain healthcare situations. So together they built seminars that made sense for the different cultural differences. For example, in terms of diabetes or more serious diseases, congenital diseases, or even issues about healthcare in general, mental health. And this activity was well evaluated by the students in spite of the challenge they had in terms of these activities. And then we saw that it was a pedagogical strategy that was very important to bring the students together in terms of these cultural differences and making it easier to have a global experience that was according to all of these important issues that we talk about. And definitely all of this can make it easier for the student to develop their moral abilities and ethical abilities as from the experience of other people, as from the different healthcare systems, the different conditions, and the different experiences of patients and families in 2 or more countries. and they looked at these differences. And at the time, they had the opportunity of interviewing families and sharing the interviews, as well as interviewing healthcare professionals and sharing professional healthcare experiences. So my time is almost up. I'm almost done, but I just wanted to highlight another activity that I think is very important and that also brings something and gets us closer to these subjects, to these important decisions related to ethics and bioethics. And one of the strategies is the use of films that you know, films that last 2 hours, and they can be seen on Netflix or in other channels. And we take extracts from these films, or we ask them to watch the movies or films, and we bring issues that are present in our daily lives. So probably you all know this film. If you haven't watched it, I recommend that you do. There are several issues about family decisions and the impact that a decision can have in the whole family group. And this film shows this very well when we have a child that is very sick, a teenager, and the parents, they get the other child to help this child. And these are the siblings that are included in the decision. And then the youngest daughter that becomes responsible for offering health to this older child. And she cannot see this sister suffering. And she starts, going for her own rights in terms of being able to live her own life, and also allowing the sister to decide what is best for her life. Taking out all of this autonomy that many times is given to the parents within this context of health and disease. So this is another example of the experience that we use. And we also look at this other film. We use this a lot in the classroom. I just brought it so that I could give you examples. And finally, I would like to conclude, and I hope that I brought a few important issues that can be discussed, and also in terms of ethics applied to the family. I'd like to conclude highlighting the importance of developing new senses about these family relations and ethics. This means that changes and transformations are happening in the family, resulting and triggered by the new generations. And there is the need to review and re-signify all of these concepts that we have with regard to what the family is, who the family is, how they are different, and how there are also aspects that are similar. So family as a complex organism and multiple faces, constant transformation, and finally, it requires knowledge from several other areas so that we can move forward. And this is what we use. Once again, I would like to thank you for the invitation and the opportunity. I hope I have addressed your demand. I would like to congratulate the committee, the ethical committee from the Family Nursing Association for this initiative. And I would like to thank everyone who helped us, offering resources so that we could make this feasible. And I would like to apologize, but unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave for a meeting with the dean as a director, but I'm going to leave my contact, Mayada, and I'm leaving one of my assistants here, and they can help you in the question and answers. So thank you very much, and welcome to the University of São Paulo, to the nursing school in Brazil, and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you very much, Regina. Thank you for for what you said. That included several aspects, and definitely it allowed everybody to understand your great experience and being able to talk about your experience at the University of São Paulo. And in the beginning of my presentation, we did not have translation, so I'm once again going to apologize for the technical problem, but I believe that it has been solved in time for everybody to be able to listen to your presentation. So thank you very much. And you can put your questions in the chat, and afterwards, we're going to be able to give you the materials, and we're going to be able to look at these questions during the presentation. Thank you.
So we're going to the next. So I'll give the word for Kim Pikerin to introduce our next speaker.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much, Dr. Sisbet, for an amazing presentation. That was really wonderful. Thank you. It is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, our second presentation. Angela Nackstedt will be speaking about taking ethics and equity to the bedside. So let me tell you a little bit about Angela. Angela is the program manager for health literacy and nursing bioethics at Children's Mercy, Kansas City in the United States. She is a faculty member of the Children's Mercy Bioethics Center and director of the Certificate in Pediatric Bioethics program and a member of the Hospital Ethics Committee. She serves as co-chair of the Children's Mercy Nursing Ethics Forum, which is really a voice of nursing in ethics throughout the organization, which was created in 1988 to provide resources and support for nursing staff at Children's Mercy in dealing with ethical issues related to nursing and healthcare. She is an active member and in nursing ethics, both nationally and presenting nationally and internationally. And she is the recent past president for the Nursing Affinity Group for the American Society of Humanities and Bioethics. Finally, she is also part of the Office of Equity and Diversity, where she manages Children's Mercy health literacy efforts and collaborates to provide DEI education projects and activities to improve justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And with that, I welcome Angela and looking forward to your presentation. Just to mention, if there are any questions, please put them in the chat, and Melissa Villegas will be monitoring that for us. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I want to thank Kim and both Kims, actually, Kim Pike-Grimm and Kim Mooney-Doyle, for they are colleagues of ours through the Children's Mercy Certificate Program in Pediatric Bioethics. And I thank both of you for giving me this honor, as well as the rest of the planning committee, to present today. And actually, I'm going to be building on part of Regina's presentation on how we can move the information that she talked about into the medical settings where patients are, like our hospitals, our clinics, and even in our community, where we can take ethics and equity to the bedside. Next slide, please. My objectives today are to explain our professional role and responsibility as nurses to address ethical and equity issues in our everyday practice, and then illustrate how care of patients and families can be enhanced through ethical discourse, culture, humility, and inclusive care. I'd also like to let you know that I have no financial relationships to or conflicts that I need to disclose related to this presentation, and I hope today will be not only a presentation, but also a conversation in the chat or when we have time for question and answers. So I'm going to go on to the next slide, which is actually, as we begin, one of the things we have to recognize, not only with ethics, but with equity in our work today, is we need to recognize the importance of both of these things in our work as we care for patients and families, as every human being, merely being human, merits our equal care and full respect. So in the new Healthy People 2030 definition of health equity, and I think we have someone whose microphone is still on, if they could mute themselves, that would be wonderful, so that everyone can hear. Our definition of health equity is the attainment of the highest level
Excuse
of
me,
health
we are
for all
unable to hear.
people.
There is no voice. Please
Achieving,
solve it.
achieving health equity requires valuing everyone's equality and focused ongoing societal efforts to address those inequalities, historical and contemporary injustices, and the elimination of health and healthcare disparities. As we begin and to reflect on this, that we need to understand what that means in our ethics world. We need to know that Dr. Martin Luther King, who spoke in the time of civil discourse here in the United States, talked about that of all forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. And unfortunately, too many times today, we do not have the possibility for everyone to have the opportunity to be healthy within our world, within our nation. And that's why we need to follow this guide of the Healthy People 2030. Let's put that into a pictorial picture. And Linda, if you wouldn't mind, if you could mute, it would help. Thank you. We are going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to show you how we can put words into pictures that help us understand what that means. Is how do we promote equity and inclusion within our healthcare system? This picture here is of the national sport of the United States. It's baseball that was founded here, but is played throughout the world. And what we want to do is these three children want to, teenagers and a teen and two children want to see the baseball game, want to participate in this. Unfortunately, when we talk about equality, we are talking about sameness. So we gave them all the same opportunity to stand on these boxes to look at the field. But unfortunately, it is not a fair representation for both all of them. So that is why we focus on equity, is giving that fair opportunity and ability to participate in our world, participate in their healthcare. But in this, it's the game of the sport. But what we also want to go beyond that is to go beyond into liberation, meaning we take down the barriers. We take down all the barriers that are facing someone in their healthcare process. And lastly, we want to provide justice or inclusion. And that means that we are giving them the opportunity to participate and be involved in their care, whether it means that they get to be engaged and heard, or that we provide tools and opportunities for them to be engaged. So hopefully this frames our work as we're talking about equity today. Next slide, please. Another thing that we need to be able to focus on in our healthcare interactions with families, knowing that many of our families come from different cultures, they speak different languages, they've had a different opportunity to engage with the healthcare system. We need to put all those aspects together and, like we said, remove those barriers and give them the tools so that they can fully participate. One way to do that is putting the onus on ourselves to understand and practice culture humility. Doctors Melanie Turvalon and Dr. Jan Marie Garcia from Los Angeles, California, actually developed this program and a process of self-reflection and discovery to understand ourselves, oneself, and then others in order to build honest and trusting relationship and trustworthy relationships. Their purpose was for us to begin to look at our own values and beliefs and where we come from. And I apologize if you're hearing something. We are having a statewide tornado drill here at our hospital today, and there's a lot of overhead information that I can't mute, but it is just a practice drill that will be done soon. So going back to culture humility, what we're looking at is becoming aware of our own values and beliefs and how we bring those into our work world in the combination of realizing our cultures and our patient and families' cultures, home and family, workplace, social group, religion, school, education, other things that would impact how we interact in a culturally humble way with our clients. Their definition was that it is our commitment and active engagement in a lifelong process that individuals enter on an ongoing basis with patients, communities, colleagues, and ourselves. It is one that we look to because in a troubled time, these two physicians were able to look at their community and say, how can we work together? And so to define that a little bit more, the lifelong process of culture humility begins with us being engaged in our own self-reflection. The way that we like to put that here is to be curious about how we came to where we are, curious about the patients and families that we're working with, being humble and wanting to be aware of our own culture, but also others' culture, and celebrate that diversity that comes into the practice place, into the hospital setting. letting go of any biases or stereotypes that we may have learned along the way, and provide a comfortable feeling of not knowing everything, not knowing what we don't know, and open to learning those things with our patients and families and through our patients and families. Another part of this is checking the power imbalances within our communication and care that we provide to our patients and families. Understanding our families are coming into a healthcare system that we have built based on medical knowledge, ways to communicate medical knowledge and information, but it's a foreign place and a foreign language to those that come into our hospitals and into our healthcare settings. We recognize we have the power because we understand the language, we understand the healthcare procedures and processes because we built them or we learned them in our training. What we want to do is bring a balance, providing our patients and families with that information, giving it to them in ways that they can understand and ways that they can use it in caring for themselves and be a part of the care that we are going to do together. How we can do that is first recognize that power balance, understanding that we do have that, but then valuing the patient's agenda when they come into that space with us, their perspectives. Let them tell the story, their child's story, how they came to be ill. What are their healthcare beliefs? What did they learn along the way? What are their priorities today while we are with them? And what stressors they may have in this relationship at this point, being ill and seeking care. The next one is for us to be advocates for institutional change and institutional accountability. Unfortunately, many of our healthcare systems were built on a basis of inequities. And we need to recognize that and acknowledge the history of where we came from, how healthcare became what it is today, but also be accountable for that relationship we have with our patients and families and the community that we work in. We need to look at our policies and procedures and processes. What makes it difficult for patients and families to access our care? What makes it difficult for them to engage that day because they have already gone through several hoops and difficult times getting to us? What are the processes we ask for them? Financial, language issues? What other things do they come? What can we make it easier for them to access the system? And how can we, as members of that organization or institution, speak up and advocate to help our patients and families so that we can develop a respectful, dynamic partnership with them and the community that surrounds our organization? Hopefully that explains a little bit about what culture humility is, but I'll leave you with those words that I like to associate. One is being humble. Being humble opens us up not only to equity, but ethical issues that we might encounter. And the other one is being curious. Be curious about how you came to be with your cultural aspects, about how our organization, be curious about how our organization came to be with the policies and procedures, and how can I be an advocate to help change those. So continually being humble and being curious can lead to us having a better relationship with our patients and families. I'm going to go to the next slide. And why this is so important. Why is culture humility a guide and an important guide for us? Because when we look at this iceberg, just as if you remember the story of Titanic and only the part that the Titanic could see of the iceberg that they eventually hit, is there is a cultural iceberg that was developed back in the 1970s by Edward T. Hall, when he suggested that culture is like an iceberg because we can only see about 10% of a person's culture. And that is those behaviors and practices that we see every day when interacting with each other when we come from a different culture. But the 90% that we don't see is those attitudes, their core values of our clients with different cultures. What our culture, we don't show everything of how we came to be, of those values that we exhibit every day, but also the core values that were learned from our families, from our education system, from our training programs that we bring along. It doesn't say they're good or bad or desirable or acceptable or undesirable, unacceptable. It is just what we have learned over time, but they impact what we present in our behaviors and our practices. So what we need to do is look at this and see sometimes how we can make assumptions on the 10% we see without learning about the other 90%, what our patients and families and our colleagues are willing to share for their culture. And that's where a lot of the diversity and equity inclusion work that we are working on continuously today in our healthcare systems. Next slide, please. So I would like to have a few questions and take a moment. I will read off the questions, but in your mind, as I read them off, just reflect on what these may mean for you. What are the values that were evident in your childhood? What family values did our parents teach us or our extended family? How and why did these values develop? Did we know the history or did we just learn them and they were embedded with us from our families? What values led you to a career in nursing? What in your education and within your family, the values you had led you to the career in nursing? Were those values validated, challenged, reshaped, or even discarded in your nursing program as you went on learning about how nursing and working with patients and families? And I'm going to add one that is not on here, is what about as you started your nursing career in the organization or hospital or clinic that you started working in? What did that organization add to your values? What values does your organization work on and embed in every employee? Some of these things we don't even think about, they just happen. And so giving yourself that time for reflection will also help you as you continue to work with your patients and family, focusing on equity. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Hopefully you have some things in your mind related to equity, to values, to cultural values, to organizational values, to professional values as a nurse, as well as your own professional values, as we see how can we combine ethics and equity on an everyday basis that keeps us in tune to what we are doing and how we are working with our patients and families. I'm going to preface this that I have a colleague that also I got to work with in our certificate program, who worked with some of her colleagues in her master's program to look at everyday ethics. And then we began to work on it here at Children's Mercy. So in explaining what everyday ethics is, it's the everyday approach to ethics approach that can serve and detect blind spots and empower the frontline moral agents, us nurses as moral agents, who can intervene on the behalf of vulnerable patients and families, or I would say, using the terminology, marginalized patients and families. So what it calls us to do is to act as moral agents. And connecting that directly to what we just talked about, we need to have a constant reminder of culture humility in doing everyday ethics. Continuously learning from our colleagues, from our patients and families especially, doing self-reflection and recognizing bias that may creep in from our own biases or values, our teams, or others that we work with. Next slide. Why is this important? Well, at the American Nurses Association's Code of Ethics and Interpretive Statements, it is a succinct statement of our ethical values, obligations and duties, and professional ideals of what a nurse is individually or collectively as the profession of nursing. It is a non-negotiable set of ethical standards. It's also the expression of nursing's own understanding of our commitment to society. So in everyday ethics, we want to make sure that we are actually focusing in on two of the provisions that really work to guide us in everyday ethics. And that would be provision 4 and 8. And they say combining those two together, it says the nurse has the authority, the accountability and the responsibility for nursing practice, and takes action consistent with the obligation to provide optimal patient care and reduce health disparities. So with that, it tells us that we need to be an ally and an advocate for our patients and families every day to speak up against discrimination, racism, injustice, and recognizing our own perceived biases, as well as suspend judgment on others when we are providing that care. The next slide, we'll go into a little bit more detail on the next slide here about everyday ethics and how we can really use that at the bedside. I like to say not only the bedside, the exam table side, or in the community when we're working with patients and families. Everyday ethics unfolds with a routine clinical encounters with practitioners, other practitioners, our healthcare team, our patients, and our families. It can be a bridge that brings bioethics truly into the clinical practice, where it occurs on a regular basis, how it may rise unexpectedly, ethical issues may rise unexpectedly in the situation, and are often commonly unrecognized and overlooked, and we just go on without even looking at them more deeply and how they may impact the care we have. One of the things that in their research, Shika Calivor and her others actually found that there is an emphasis on primary ethical awareness, claiming that every nursing action has an ethical implication. It's not just one that we recognize on the spot, but it's every time we're doing something. So we need to recognize it continuously. Also, then there are frontline staff can be engaged in this as a standard part of practice. There are many things that may rise up, whether it's a conflict, whether it's a dilemma, or it's an outright injustice in the way we're doing things. So we need to be particularly cognizant and aware that these may arise and anticipate them so that we can address them in our clinical setting rather than letting them come up in another situation later in their care, especially during decision-making time and other times that we see ethical decisions occur. So what it does in everyday ethics is with our ANA's position statement on the next slide, we'll say that it is a call to action for us to recognize equity and ethics at the bedside every day at every hour. So if we can go to that next slide, I'm going to read that call to action for us. Our ANA position statements encourage the individual nurse as well as the profession as a whole to recognize the potential impact of unintentional discrimination or biases that engage in our examination of these every day when we're working with patients and families. It is truly our deeply held values that guide us in that action. So being open, learning more about the inequities that can occur and ways that we can address them in the moment allows us to pay more attention each day and work with our families as we care for them. So I have a few questions. We have a few questions from the work of becoming an everyday ethicist that can be applied to our daily work. So if we'll go to the next slide, we'll have some of those questions, especially in times of trouble when bias and racism can really be encountered in the clinical setting. So on the next slide, we're going to look at some of these questions. So how's the family and patient's perspective situated in history? Do they come with historical context that informs fears and attitudes and behaviors that come up in patient care? Do we as nurses have those same things, but how do we focus on the family to address those? What is the power and racial dynamics that we talked about earlier that can exist between a healthcare team, knowing that we as healthcare professionals have the medical language, have the medical understanding of processes and procedures that our families may not have? What power does that give us? It can give us a lot. What are some of the existing biases and ethical issues that may impact that relationship or trust between the family and the care team? Think about those things that often come as an ethical consult, or what folks are struggling with, or a dilemma that's occurring between the team and the family. Think about those and how those power dynamics and information can come about. What is existing biases that may impact the relationship that we have with our patients and families? As a nurse, am I being influenced by biases making judgments? Meaning, because I have the medical knowledge and I think that should be understood, or maybe how I present it, I thought it should have been understood, but it's not. What other information do I need to assess the family story? And this is where I often put on my health literacy and diversity, equity, inclusion hat. This is the main crux of where we are at. We need to pay attention to the language and how we talk with our patients and families. We really need to talk about how we communicate. We have the language, but they may not. We need to use interpreters when it's necessary. We need to work with those interpreters so that we are paying attention to our patients and families when providing that information. We also need to put things in plain language, not the medical language that we're used to sharing with our colleagues, but the language that our patients and families can understand. What are words we can use instead of the typical medical language? How do we check that to make sure that they understood? This is where we can use tools such as TeachBack, or asking clarifying questions, or maybe at the beginning, we ask the patient, what's brought them there today? What are things that are worrying them? What are questions we can ask, or just give permission for them to tell us their story and we listen to them? Next slide. We're going to move in to, as we talked about, nurses being everyday ethics champions at the bedside. So that's the term I'm going to go to now, is not that we just practice everyday ethics, but we become ethics champions and nursing ethics leaders in our own setting with our colleagues to create a world that our patients can benefit from the care that we provide. How do we do that? I worked with two of my colleagues that we met at another conference where we were always showing up at the same time to the same presentations and focusing on pediatrics especially, but on ethics. And so a colleague who is now a colleague of Kim Pike-Grimm's at Stanford, Heather Fitzgerald, and another retired colleague of ours, Karen Chodajad from the Children's Hospital in Atlanta, we began to ask ourselves and talk with each other about, do you have a program? How do we get our nurses to learn more about ethics? How do they become an integral part of the ethical climate of our organization? And what we came up with was building ethics champions programs. And we based it on 3 of the Code of Ethic provisions. Provision 4 that confirms the nurse's duty to recognize ethical issues and institutional constraints on ethical practice, and to raise those for reflection and discussion. We then also looked at provision 5, which I think every one of us as a nurse knows that this is one thing that we need more of at this time, and that's our duty to ourselves. The obligation for us to preserve the wholeness and character and integrity and our own expression of our own moral point of view. It's essential for us to have that, to be able to care for ourselves in the difficult situations that we encounter every day in our healthcare environment. And the third one was describes the impact, it's provision 6, describes the impact of the nurse's moral agency can have on those professional environments. How individual nurses and nurses as a group, whether it's in our organization, in our professional organizations, our hospital organizations, or with our patients and families, can improve that ethical environment in our work setting. What we came up with was 7, I think there's 7, yes, or 8, it may be 8 things that we needed to create these ethical champions program. First of all, is you need to create a customized program in your own institution, because that's the nurses you work with. That's how they work together. So develop a program that meets the needs of your nurses. You have to have stakeholder, meaning the nurses themselves, but most of all, you need to have institutional leadership support. to get an ethics champion program off the ground. You have to create moral spaces where nurses can come together and talk ethics, ask questions, learn together, talk together. You need to build a core ethics curriculum so nurses can learn about ethics. Is there only in that setting? Hopefully not. Hopefully your organization allows ethics education throughout the organization, interdisciplinary ethics education, learning from different professions and how we can work together. Finding ways to strengthen the leadership to continue that ethics. I'm not talking the ethics committee, I'm talking nursing ethics. Leadership, someone who's willing, or many people who are willing to step up and say, nurses need to be a part of ethics, and how can we build that? You need to recruit and engage members, meaning members of that ethics program, champion program. You need to continually evaluate that program. And I think there were 7 things in the paper that we wrote, but the last one came from our own program. You have to have persistence and dedication to the work that you want to do as nurse ethicists. So the next slide is going to show you what we built our foundation on. These 2 ladies at the top are the 2 sisters that formed our Children's Mercy Hospital. They founded it in 1897. They were a surgeon, a woman surgeon, and a woman dentist, 2 blood sisters that moved to the Kansas City area where we are located. Children's Mercy is located in the middle of the United States in Kansas City, Missouri, but also on the other side in Kansas. We're right on the 2-state line. These 2 sisters came here, and after they moved here, found a child on the street in need of medical care. They took that child into their home, and that became the beginning of our hospital. However, around 1914, they developed a nursing school within Children's Mercy Hospital to care for children. And back in about 2015, when the new updated American Nurses Code of Ethics was coming out, one of our former emergency physicians here at the hospital, who did a lot of history work, discovered the first nursing pledge for the nurses at the Mercy Nursing School. At the same time, that new Code of Ethics came out, and our Nursing Ethics Champions program decided to delve into the history. And what we found is the 4 stanzas of this nursing pledge on this slide actually reflected all 9 provisions of the new updated Code of Ethics. The one that we really want to pay attention to often when we're talking about our issues is one of them is that these 2 physicians in this nursing code talked about how that nurses should work collectively or cooperatively with the physician or surgeon to lessen the disease and suffering of the children we're caring for, but not by blind obedience to the orders of the physician, but through the realization and of dignity and responsibility of the nursing profession. Though they were doctors, they looked at nursing to be the lead with the patients. Also, then the last stanza where it says, I will hold before myself ideal and not measured by money or personal favor or advancement, but that will always inspire me to give my work the best of which I am capable. And what that spoke to us was that we would do that caring for ourselves, making sure that we were paying attention to that duty to ourselves as a nurse, why we were in this, why we were caring for children. And then that was also provision 9, that we took the social responsibility to care for children, all children that came to our hospital. And that is a key that one of our founders, Dr. Catherine Berry Richardson, who was the surgeon, always said, we cannot care for children at our organization unless we care for all children. So they brought equity into the care that they provided, as well as we do today. So on our next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about our specific ethics champion program. It was actually started back in 1988. So as my 2 colleagues that worked on this together used to say, we were the older senior citizens of this work in ethics champion program. But what we were founded on was creating a moral space for nurses to come together to talk about ethics. in creating. And one of the things you will notice in our name, it does not say nursing champions, nursing liaisons, it says a nursing ethics forum. And what we found early on is nurses like to come together and talk to each other, talk about things that are going on. But what we did was put this in a ethical perspective, to have ethical dialogue and ethics conversation. It's where we could bring up ethical issues, but oftentimes, as we know, ethical issues in nursing may not be just ethical. It may be related to nursing processes and programs and ways that we do things at our hospital. So we wanted to bring up both the professional aspect of nursing, where we look and I don't want to say dissect, but are always cognizant of what our processes and procedures have impact on the patients and families, as well as on the nurses themselves. But then also look at ethical issues that are arising within the interdisciplinary teams, within nursing, with our patients and families. Our Nursing Ethics Forum wanted to be inclusive within nursing, meaning we want to have representation from all areas of the hospital where nurses practice, whether it be on a unit, in the clinic, in the community. We also wanted to have many generations, so we can have generational perspectives. Levels of nursing, meaning having representations from the managerial level of nursing, from the nursing leaders to the managers, to the staff nurses, to even at times make sure that we're hearing the voices of our care assistants and techs that work with us, bringing them into the fold when they feel comfortable coming and having a conversation. We wanted to have all shifts because we know there's an different environment on each shift. We wanted to have a collaborative effort. So one of the other things that we wanted to do was to make sure that we began to see we needed a champion from each of the areas, or more than one, to represent and take ethics back to the bedside. That was one of our goals when we discovered the code of ethics connection to our foundation, is how can we continually engage in taking ethics back to the bedside? And that's where the education comes in. First, educating the nurse champions, but allowing them to educate their colleagues. We also wanted to have collaborative efforts. So not only is it that we only have nurses in the space when we're having our ethics forum meetings and conversations, we bring in interdisciplinary colleagues to give us perspectives or to guide us when we're looking at new ways of addressing certain issues. It provides us education. We've oftentimes had parents come into our space and provide us information on how we can provide better care. We really focus on that leadership and support, not just the support from our leaders, but the support of each other, creating nursing ethics leaders within the forum. We have an obligation, we feel, but also an expectation of active work within the forum, meaning we're not just keeping that education to ourselves, we're taking it back to the unit. And like I said, persistence and dedication. Next slide is going to show kind of one of the things that we do when we have an ethical issue come and where we're trying to do ethics and action. You'll recognize the identify, clarify, investigate, act part. That is a part of many ethical discussions, many of looking at an ethical issue. But for us, we wanted to take a little different approach to it and keep the traditional ethics. So if you look on one side, it will say we go to identify. First, we need to identify what the problem or the ethical dilemma is. But when we clarify it, we want to clarify, is this issue? Because nurses like to talk a lot about a lot of different things, a lot of different issues. Is it an ethical issue or is it a process issue? Oftentimes we find it's not really an ethical issue, but it's a process that is causing difficulty either for our patients and families, for us as nurses, or for our unit to really do the work we need to do. So clarifying that issue is very important on what direction do we go. So the next is to investigate that. On the ethics side, we're going to look at our ethics principles and look through the literature on the ethics literature. But on the nursing process side, we're going to look at, are there policies and procedures out there that can guide us? Is there a discussion with a leader that can shed us more light? Or one of our colleagues who really works in this field? Look at the literature, what is there? After we've done that, work, we're going to act. Hopefully, sometimes we identify that early on, and that act can go in many forms, but one of the ones is through going to the ethics committee and asking for a consultation. Oftentimes nurses feel uncomfortable doing this. We hopefully are taking down that hierarchy that has always been felt that an ethics consultation has to go through the medical staff first, and it doesn't. And that's one thing that we've been able to do over the years, that anyone in our hospital bringing about that education is to really think about even a family member, a janitor, or environmental service colleague, the dietitian can bring up an ethics consultation, ask for an ethics consultation. But if it's on the other side, we need to take this issue to nursing administration and help fix the problem, fix the dilemma, whatever we want to call that. But oftentimes it can also reveal itself in education, correcting a communication problem, connecting awareness around a policy or procedure, or even asking for a different referral from another colleague, another interdisciplinary colleague. And what we found, we actually stopped there for a few years, but what we found in doing this process, that it empowers nurses to be looking at ethics in a way that they are a part of the ethics climate here at the hospital. They are a part of the ethics process, and it empowered them to incorporate that knowledge and take different actions the next time, or create new processes or policies. And one of the things that we developed from that was, not only is there the Nursing Ethics Forum with a hospital-wide representation that meets monthly, and anybody can come to the meetings that wants to, any nurse, but there's a core group that comes together monthly. But we started unit forums. So we have a forum in our PICU that they come together monthly. It coincides with the day that their shared governance council meets, and they talk about ethics. They bring in speakers, they review an article just like we do. We review, talk about movies that may have occurred, like Regina talked about, but they bring up those issues that focus on the critical care area, the pediatric critical care area, and how they do that. We started one in our ambulatory tower. That one actually became an interdisciplinary forum where they talked about issues that were impacting ambulatory care. For example, at the time when we were having crisis within the United States with immigrants, and having a fear that they would be picked up as they came to the hospital by ICE, the immigration enforcement folks, and really needed to talk about the ethical issues around that. So the forums take on a life of their own, but also have representation in the Nursing Ethics Forum. So a few years back, we did a poster at our one of the National Nursing Ethics Conference, and I'm going to go to that on the next slide, that shows how it gives a pictorial view of what Nursing Ethics Forum can do. And we called it a conduit of change. And that change can be in educational knowledge, it can be in policy, it can be in a variety of ways. But oftentimes, as we found, Nursing Ethics Forum starts a conversation, starts a discussion, either within nursing, within an interdisciplinary team, or often within our families. And that discussion doesn't just stay there. It comes into the Nursing Ethics Forum to see how can we look at this situation through an ethical lens, and what can we do with that information, and how can we improve our ethical climate or our nursing processes or procedures. And so that's where the changes occur. Oftentimes it's even within safety. As many of you know, that during COVID, we had issues where nurses' safety has become an apparent issue that we have to deal with. Actually, that happened here years before. Mostly verbal escalations, but at times they could cross over into those that could possibly cause physical harm to a nurse. And it was brought up, and we were able to take that to nursing administration and go on it through the processes. We needed to have an organizational change to create a group that responds in a timely fashion to a situation that's occurring. It's an interdisciplinary to make sure that there is safety on the unit, not only for the nurses, but for the patients and families. And over time, that has continued to evolve into many of the processes we have today, and became the foundation for creating better policies when we began to experience that again during COVID. And then finally, it just brings this full circle. And this is just when some of our nurses were asked about what that participate in Nursing Ethics Forum, why did they enjoy being a part of Nursing Ethics Forum, or why did Nursing Ethics Forum provide a service to nurses? And what they had said was it fostered that safe, nurturing environment for our nurses to bring ethical issues and empower them as professionals to initiate change. So I think what that does now is we are spending a lot of time in our Nursing Ethics Forum, not only looking at ethical issues, but also looking at the equity issues within our facility. I'm looking at our time, and Kim, I'm going to ask your opinion. Should we do a case, or should we just bring up some snippets of a case so I can then finish up after that?
How about we do some snippets of a case and then you finish up? Does that sound okay?
That sounds great. Thanks.
Awesome.
So what we're going to do here is I'm going to give you a snippet of a couple of cases, and I'd like you in the chat or just yourself to reflect on, as Kim brings up the next slide, being a children's hospital, I'm going to have pictures of kids, and the word belonging is there. And I'm going to, before we start with that, there is a common thread. Looks like we have a mic that's open. It's pretty hard to hear. So just checking with everybody, make sure you're muted. And so that belonging thread helps us to give focus to these snippets that I'm going to share with you. But especially when there's an ill child or parent, the parents of an ill child, we know that at that time, it is really hard for them to really feel like they are still the leader of their family because of the stress put upon them. So one of the things that we're going to see through these little snippets is the role of the parent in helping their child still be the focus, but also their family feeling like they belong in the healthcare team and in the environment of the hospital. So the first one it was brought to us in the critical care, from a critical care area, from the PICU. It was a young teen who was having to be intubated and was going through a time of identity, trying to really figure out who he was as a patient, as a person. And so he had confided in the nurse that he preferred to have the pronouns of they, did not want to be called he, and wanted that nurse to know before he was intubated, although for communication between them, although his parents didn't know that this is what he wanted to do. So it was very hard for the nurse at the time. What should she do? Especially when the parents would be there. How can she honor this teen's request, especially when he could not communicate anymore at that time with his parents verbally, and communicate with the staff, but still wanted to feel respected. And so think about that. How would you as a nurse respond to that? How can you be respectful of that child? How can you, or teen, excuse me, that teen, how can you be respectful of that family? And how can you bring your ethics and code of ethics into play at that time? I'll let you sit with that one for a little bit. And does anybody want to share what they would do in the chat? Or okay, I don't see one right now, but I'm going to go on to the next one because it kind of goes along the same way a little bit. Actually, you can go back to the slide. I'm going to go one more case. I'm going to give them two cases to keep with this. Kim, if you don't mind, if you can go back. But anyway, the next one is talking about our parents, and especially our families that come from a different culture, that speak a different language, may be able to have a little bit of English, but not a lot of English in their vocabulary. Here in the United States, it could be a different language in another country. Oftentimes we work with the interpreters. Unfortunately, we may not be able to have an in-person interpreter. Or if we do have an in-person interpreter, It does not match, especially in our fetal health center where we have healthy moms giving birth to babies who need interventions right away, may not have a female interpreter to be available at that time. How do we as nurses not only provide the language that they need, provide the important, respectful interpreter for that time? Our interpreters are all respectful, but how can we maybe advocate for a female interpreter at that time and actually use the language and allow the parents the time to be able to speak? It may be one of the things for a respectful engagement with an interpreter, and that is to position the interpreter in the right place so the focus stays on the patient and the family. That is one of the things that we've been talking about within our intensive care nursery. As you know, with preemie babies and their isolettes, there's not a lot of space around those patients, but we need to be respectful of the space around them and provide the best interpreter presence as possible. What we came up with, because we also use computer or telehealth interpreting, is to position the interpreter or the computer right next to the nurse. That way, both the interpreter and the nurse are focusing on the family at the patient's bedside, providing the information, because there's a lot of information we can gain through our eyes as well as our language. And I did see that Kit had brought up something that we could present the young man's request to the parents in the most respectful way possible, explain that the nurses want to respect their son's position, but also ask the parents' responses to the situation, making that situation more comfortable. That's a great opportunity for the nurse to be that liaison between patients and families, especially many times, especially as teens are getting more, I don't want to say responsibility, but they're getting more opportunity to be a part of their healthcare, not just their parents guiding their healthcare. And that's where we are, as a liaison between those as children grow. And in this situation, there's an added layer that we would need to work with to make that happen. So Kit, I really appreciate that. For anyone who wants to think about how we work with our patients and families and the ethical issues, especially of bias creeping in, not just with the language issues creeping in and making sure that we have resources available, but thinking sometimes as the values and the biases that are spoken mostly implicit, not explicit, but describing the patients and families that do not speak English or may not speak the same language that we do, and in interpreting and putting stereotypes or biases on there without knowing. So again, bringing in culture humility. So in family dilemmas, the ones that Regina actually already talked about a little bit is on this slide, and how our equity and ethics need to come into play is there are times when the healthcare team and families do not agree. We have different standards of what constitutes harm. In other words, what we see as the best interest of the child may not be what the family does, but where do we have to delineate what is harm and what is in best interest? Acting on different values, we've talked a lot about that, but also sometimes we're not able to reach that compromise. And that's where the ethics committee needs to come in to help us with that. But if we look at these situations, can we infuse everyday ethics and equity into these situations? Can we also practice culture humility? Can we listen actively? Can we be curious and humble and respected? Can we seek to understand first before trying to be understood? Can we give space and create spaces where needed, but give space to patients and families as well as to our colleagues? And can we use a nursing ethics champion program as a way of prevention for learning to bring up discussions where we can learn from past dilemmas and past experiences? So the next slide has just a few more questions that you can ask yourself and how you can promote ethics and equity at the bedside or in any setting that you're in. Just ask these questions as you leave your shift, leave the space that you're working in that day. And really, how were we fair and just in our work today? creating a culture that centers on justice, equity, and inclusion, as well as ethics in our work. Sometimes we have mentors and people to thank along the way. I'm going to bring up the next slide, and really, I've never met one of these people in person, but had a really big influence on me on where we were thinking when we were thinking of ethics and equity. And that's Representative John Lewis, who was in our United States Congress for many and many years, who said, when you see something that's not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. You have to say something, and you have to do something. And then you'll see another person here who is Sister Rosemary Flanagan, who is a philosopher and teacher and worked at our Center for Practical Bioethics here in Kansas City, who was a friend, I just call her a friend because that's what she asked us to call her, of our Nursing Ethics Forum. In our early days, throughout the time, she has guided us in what we can do, and she left us with an Aristotle quote that said, what we are, what we repeatedly do, excellence then is not an act, but a habit. The reason why I bring both of these people together is they actually met one day. And currently, it is about today, maybe the day. In 1965, they would have met on the Pettus Bridge, which was called where Martin Luther King had his walk he was walking to Atlanta, I guess is where it was, or to Jackson, wherever it was, the capital in Alabama, around with civil rights. Sister Rosemary was a young nun just beginning her career, and Mr. Lewis was working in the civil rights activities. They met to cause some good trouble that day. They raised ethical issues in our civil rights. They gave voice to those issues. They made sure that others were present with them at the table, and they did something. So that is what I will leave you with. I am sorry that we ran out of time for as many questions, but I want to thank all of you for being here and for the planning committee for this great conference where we could share. But we do have a couple of minutes. So anybody that has a question, let's see if you can put it in the chat and we'll try to address it.
Thank you so much, Angie. This was a wonderful presentation with really important topics for nursing and other disciplines to consider in their daily practice. And it's just been incredible to hear about some of your programs. There is a question and a comment, if I could just read it, from Yamisi, who says, in most parts of South Africa, child-headed homes are quite common as a result of the consequences of HIV/AIDS. The dilemma we experience is to be able to define who is family. Is it ethical to engage children as a head of his or her family? What are the ethical suggestions to address these issues?
I think some of that comes back to what we've discussed, is having that conversation with that family and see how they make decisions. How are those decisions done? We know here in the United States, we often have adolescent or teenage moms and dads that come and they are making decisions, but we know they also have others helping them guide that decision. And there's also sometimes we have an ethical issue because those teens at that moment, they can make decisions for that sick baby, but they couldn't make their own healthcare decisions because they're not of age to do so. And I think that's what happens here. But how does the family work together to make those healthcare decisions? I think is looking at that, having those conversations with that family to learn that, and then having the healthcare team come together and understand that also to make decisions together. I hope that's helpful, but I think that's the way that we would want to look at it ethically, knowing they are the head of the family. But how does the family make those decisions then?
Important points. Thank you. And then there's a comment, and I think that this person is referring to your NICU example. She says, this is so difficult when you are a neonatal care nurse because parents are meeting their real baby now.
I think that is the tough point. And I think for us as nurses, that's also a tough time. And in talking with our colleagues, how that case was brought to me was that it was actually in doing a health literacy, how do we talk with families that speak a different language in a way, and that is, I think we get busy when it's tough for us, we get busy with the things we have to do. And so we're talking with them while we're doing things rather than focusing on that family at the time. Because when they're meeting that baby, their real baby then is an emotional time. we should be taking in what are those emotions they are experiencing while we're also keeping tabs on assessing the baby, but assessing them to be able to meet them where they're at that time and provide them what they need. If there's shock, how do we soften that shock and explain, this is your baby, use the baby's name to acknowledge the baby still in their presence, you know, as because they had a different picture of what it is. I think that's what they're probably trying to get at. But also then telling them you can touch, if they can touch the baby, explaining the things that are happening to the baby and bringing out, as you would as a normal parent, because many parents are hard, they don't want to pick up that baby if they're scared, you know, or whatever. So bringing about the reality that could, softening that reality for them by assessing where they're at.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And then there's all kinds of wonderful comments about your excellent presentation in the chat. Thank you so much, Angie. It's just wonderful to have you here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you all for the opportunity.
We've scheduled in a break between for the next half hour, for the next 30 minutes. So if you want to just turn off your cameras and go stretch your legs, grab a snack, coffee, whatever, and we'll see you back in 30 minutes. Thank you all.
Kim, are you there?
Hi, Kit. I'm here. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey.
You're going to open up, right? And then I'll introduce Barbara.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is going extremely well.
Yeah. I you know, Angie is, I mean, she was one of the leads on I took the bioethics pediatric certificate program during my postdoc, and she was just amazing. Yeah. As you saw. Yeah, no, I think it's great. I think that and we've had a really good turnout.
Yeah.
Like up to 97. I've been sort of tracking a little bit numbers.
Yeah, I know, me too.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think this is kind of unheard of.
Yeah.
In the IFNA seminar.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I think the Brazilian participants really help, but just overall, it's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's been great.
Yeah. You know, you can ask the organizers there in Brazil if they can at least give you a breakdown of the countries of the people who have participated.
Yeah, I'm hoping. So I threw together that evaluation, but I added a few questions yesterday. One is, which country do you work in? Now, this is only for the evaluation for those who choose to complete it, but we'll get a little bit of data from that. But going into it, I can't remember the series of questions when they registered. We might be able to capture some of that. But you're thinking now if they can give us an idea?
Yeah, I think, well, I just know when I did it with Debbie, she could give me a readout of all the participants and their country of origin. I forget what else she gave me. Now, maybe that was because it was the IFNA website. I'm not sure.
Okay.
It'll give you a better, if they can do it for you, you know, basically the folks in Brazil, they have access to that kind of data.
I'll send Mayara in the chat.
Yeah.
Question about that. Yeah.
Because not everybody's going to fill out the eval, right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Just like not everybody who registers actually shows up.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Barbara, are you ready? Angie had asked me earlier also about, getting in information about the upcoming, about the certificate program. I said, absolutely. So she's put that in the chat. Sorry, Barbara.
No, no problem. Well, you asked me if I was ready. I don't know. I'm the only not native Danish or English speaker, because if I could do it in Danish, it wouldn't be any problem at all.
But Barbara, you know, your English is fantastic.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Well, you will
Much better than
see,
my Danish. I mean, which is zero.
probably, probably, but I will still have to like search for words, and because I don't speak English on a daily routine, or so you kind of rusty, and then when you have to do it like with English words that you don't use on a daily basis and things like that, you have to think about a lot.
Yeah,
So
Barbara.
I apologize.
No, Barbara, I still have memories from when I tried to speak Danish on the train to Unsa for IFNA in 2015, so you will be fabulous. I do wonder if we should not do the breakout rooms because of the time and that we might lose from going back and forth.
Mhm.
So do you want to call on us for questions? I will be, if you need anything, like I'm happy to be part of your case or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm
I
afraid
have a
that,
case, but and that's a video and a family problem. And then I ask them what considerations they would do if they had to interview the family about these, well, issues about genetic inheritance. Yeah.
yeah.
So, so I don't know, because I only have like 26, something like that, PowerPoints. And of course I never read out of my PowerPoints, but I do now because it's in another language.
Mm.
And then I supplement with explanations or things that could be relevant. But I don't know. When I tested it, it took like 35 minutes, something like that. But I don't know how it will proceed now. We will see.
I think your case will generate lots of very good discussion. My fear is if we channel all the people into the breakout rooms and the time that takes and then channel them all back, we might lose time for your good discussion. I don't know what do others think.
But I'm afraid that people won't discuss when we are too many. That's at least my experience. When I teach on Zoom, people are quite reluctant in participating in discussions and things like that. So we will see.
Okay.
Otherwise, you have to fill in the empty spaces.
I am here to help.
Thank you. You're
As our other
everybody is so
subcommittee
helpful.
members.
So
We're
Yeah.
here for you, Barbara.
thank you.
Barbara, just I want to check if you want us to pass your slides or if you want to do it.
I present my own slides, but you had the slides, didn't you? Or
Yeah.
so you can give me the control of my slides, or I can share my screen from my own slides. You decide.
Yeah, if you can share your screen for your own slides, so I think it's better.
Okay,
But
I will.
in case you need us to share the screen for you, we have your slides here, so just let us know.
Exactly. Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay.
No.
Yes.
No,
Yes.
Kit can't.
Should we get started? Yeah.
But Kit can't see my my slides, and she
Can
was
you see her
supposed to.
slide?
If everyone else is okay, it might just be my settings. So if everyone else can see them, it's fine.
At least I can.
There, now I have them.
Got it. Okay,
Great.
great. Well, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a nice break, and we are ready for to introduce our third presenter, and Dr. Kit Chesla will be the moderator for this next presentation. Welcome, Dr. Chesla.
Thank you. So hello, everyone. I'm just going to introduce myself. I'm Professor Emeriti from the Department of Family Nursing at the University of California at San Francisco. And I am delighted to be able to introduce Dr. Barbara Voltelen, who is a health visitor and a senior lecturer in the Department of Nursing at the University College at Lillebælt in Denmark. Dr. Voltelen is focusing on supporting families throughout the lifespan, living with health challenges in a cross-professional setting. She conducts national and international research among families where a family member suffers a life-threatening disease. She is a member of the Danish Society for Family Nursing and the ethics subgroup in IFNA. She's going to speak today about research and policy in family ethics. Thanks, Dr. Voltelen.
Thank you very much, Kit. I'm from Denmark, and apparently I'm the only one who has to make a speech in a not native language. So I apologize in advance if I don't pronounce things correctly, if I search for words, well, that's because I mainly speak Danish. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm so delighted, and I have been looking forward to it. I teach ethics at the nursing school, actually in English. And then my research is primarily among families, and my objective is actually, I have two objectives for this presentation. One is to enhance knowledge about ethical considerations, doing joint interviews with families. And the second is to prompt researchers to discuss advantages and pitfalls doing family research. Normally, I would never read from my PowerPoints, but because it's in English, I will unfortunately read, and then I would supplement with comments that are hopefully helpful to understand what I wrote in the PowerPoints. Yeah, thank you. And I hope you can see my PowerPoints because I advance them myself. So if you have any problems or anything, don't hesitate. Write in the column for texts, or how do you say, to Kit, and she will help you. And you are also very welcome to make questions throughout my presentation, and Kit will forward them to me, or we can wait until after. But I think during the presentation, if you have specific questions for each or any slide, then make the question and Kit will help you to get through to me. Yeah. Well, the content for this presentation will be a little bit about policy and apparently for most well-known facts about ethical dilemmas and issues in research. And as we also already heard from our two former presenters, we are well positioned in the ethical context. I will talk about the Nuremberg Code, the Bellman Report, the International Council of Nursing's point of departure, the researcher as a patient advocate, and vulnerable research subjects. that's just for an introduction, and that's for making the context clear. Then I will talk about a literature I made when I made my doctoral thesis about ethical challenges doing joint interviews with families. And then we made updated data search because we finished the other one in 2016. So we tried to see if something new came up. So I will try to add that on my integrative review. Yeah, unfortunately, during Second World War, we had some issues with people doing research and unethical research in Germany. And therefore, we actually had to focus on how to prevent things like that to happen in the future. And the Nuremberg Code was described in 1947, and it was concerned with several criteria for research, including researchers must inform subjects about the study, which means that we are obliged to introduce all issues about the research so people can make an informed consent if they want to participate or not. We also need to do research that must be good for the society. So we're not allowed to make research that actually does not benefit society. It could be only for monetary reasons or whatever, but we are not allowed to that. We should also, as researchers, try to avoid injury on our research subjects, which means we're not supposed to harm people doing our research. And subjects or the researcher can always stop the study if problems occur. We have known studies where they actually try to, for example, the study about how to treat pupils in a class, that if you meet them with optimistic and acknowledgement, they will achieve better results than if you meet them with negativity and insults and things like that. And they actually had to stop that research because of the unethical results that the class that were treated badly actually did experience harm. So we're not allowed to do research like that. We always have to think about the best for the people. In 1979, they made the Bellman Report, formed by the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. And the commission had two goals: to identify basic ethical principles that should guide the conduct of research involving human subjects, and to develop guidelines based on principles that had been identified. So these three basic principles related to research subjects were identified, like respect for the persons, and that the research subject should have autonomy and self-determination. The idea about beneficence, the research subjects should be protected from harm, and the idea of justice, that research subjects should receive fair treatment. And actually, this is also found in the Helsinki Declaration. Professor Regina, she also talked about the International Council of Nursing, and their point of departure in nursing is 4 basic areas of responsibility for nurses: that we do have to promote health, that we have to prevent illness, that we have to restore health, and to alleviate suffering. So when we work as nurses, it's actually very important that we act with both ethics and moral awareness. And I think that both our two first presenters made a very good point of view and an insight to how we as nurses can work with this awareness. Nursing research is guided by the principles like in the Helsinki Declaration of Autonomy, Beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. And autonomy is about people having the opportunity to choose themselves what they want and to decide for themselves. And if they have to decide for themselves, of course, they have to know what they decide about. The beneficence is to do good or to support knowledge to make things better for, in our trade, patients and people encountering the healthcare sector. And non-maleficence is about not doing harm, which is very important because we are actually obliged to do our best and to serve everybody for the better. And justice is about following both legislation, how do you say that? Legislation, and the guidelines for nursing activity. I think these are good points of departure, and I think both in clinical practice and during education, it's important that we emphasize how important ethics and moral behavior is in nursing. As a nurse and as a researcher, the researcher should also act as a patient advocate, because we have a responsibility to protect the privacy and the dignity of people involved in the research. And we also have an obligation to refrain from conducting a research study involving undue physical risks, psychological risk, or both. So we are always obliged to consider what impact does our research have to the participants. And in the later years, we have begun to actually invite people to research already in the very early stages, where patients and families can be part of the research as participatory design. And I think that's one way actually to work in a morally and ethically good way to actually make research that makes sense to the people it's about. And of course, we also must assume responsibility for study conditions. And that's one of the ways to protect our participants. We will, in our trade, meet people who are vulnerable, and sometimes it's actually very difficult for vulnerable people to have a say in research, because there are a lot of ethical dilemmas, and most research will then exclude vulnerable people. And of course, it's convenient, but it's a pity for the vulnerable people, because it's actually their situation we could support and help and develop better treatment, better encounters in the healthcare system if we were to involve and include vulnerable subjects. And of course, these certain groups are considered particularly vulnerable because they are unable either to give informed consent or because they are coerced to participate. We have to have special precautions and ensure that the study has a low risk of potential harm for these vulnerable people. And the vulnerable groups could include children, cognitively impaired persons, prisoners, persons with stigmatizing diseases such as mental illness or sexual dysfunction, unhoused persons, or unconscious or sedated patients. You can probably add on to the list. So now I want you to reflect for a couple of minutes and stretch your legs because we've been sitting here for some hours, and contemplate on why is this knowledge important, doing research or being a witness to research and data gathering in the clinical setting. So I don't know what time it is now. Kit, would you say when we should be back?
Yes, I can do that.
In a couple of minutes?
Mhm.
So like 10 to wherever you are, I am, my time is 6 o'clock 48 right now in the
Mhm.
evening. You are probably somewhere else, but 10 to. Okay.
Yes, yes. Okay. I think it's fine.
Okay. Does anyone have any comments on why is this knowledge so important doing research or being witness to research and data gathering? Is it just something that we have to do because it's written in the Helsinki Declaration? Or because we can't publish if we don't write that we follow the Helsinki Declaration? Okay, you can think a little bit about that. I published an integrated literature review about ethical consideration when conducting joint interviews with close relatives or family, an integrative review. And we did that because we actually experienced that having more parties gathered as family could actually pose specific ethical problems and considerations. Because interview and focus group interviews are well known as methodologies in research, but there are a difference in between focus group interviews and interview when you have family research, because they already have a relation, and they should hopefully have a good relation after the interview. So the need for interviewing close relatives in small groups or dyads occurs, and the joint interviews could be an opportunity to gain specific knowledge about the family dynamics, but it's not very well described in the literature. And studies indicate actually that having a relationship with conflicts is one that is torn is one of the strongest predators for a negative health outcome. So therefore, when we interact with our participants in interviews where we have more than one present at the same time, it's actually very important that we do not make family conflicts doing our research. So therefore, I wanted to find out what's out there, what knowledge do we have, and how can we focus on these challenges doing joint interviews with families. So the purpose was to illuminate the literature regarding specific ethical challenges by conducting joint interviews with interrelated people in order to avoid doing harm to the individuals and the relationship. So the search method I used was Spider, and actually I was very challenged because searching for ethical issues poses quite an big amount of hits, because everybody is supposed to write something about ethics. So it was actually not that easy to find the specific articles that I wanted to review. And another problem was that we did not only or solely use or search for studies about ethical, but also for experts and people who knew something about it, their opinions and points of views. So I was very challenged in finding the right and manageable amount of studies. But we searched in PubMed, in CINAHL, in Philosophers Index, and Academic Premier Search between 1980 and 2014. So we found 7 articles in total, 9 with information about joint interviews, but superficial about ethical challenges. That means that they actually described how they did the interview and how they found their participants and how they conducted everything, and how they how they followed up after the interviews and things like that, but not too much about ethical challenges. And then I found 8 targeting the ethical challenges in doing joint interviews. So I made a thematic analysis and tried to sort all the informations that these 17 articles gave me. And 2 main themes occurred about ethical challenges conducting joint interviews. One main theme was the ethical challenge in conducting the interviews, and the other one was when planning or reporting from the joint interviews. So conducting joint interviews, we were very much aware of these specific challenges. So it was also described how the possible negative impact was on relationship, especially when you talked with them about sensitive topics and interrelations problems in their relationship, or about taboos or about things that were hard to manage. And they also described how you, as a researcher, can prompt harm when secrets are revealed, because people does not necessarily share all their secrets with each other, even though they are in a relationship or close related or a family member. So sometimes when they conducted these interviews, they experienced that things came up to the surface that they never talked about before. You can also jog memories that were either suppressed or forgotten. And this can also be a problem because mostly when we suppress things, it's because we need to protect ourselves. So when you talk about things that are problematic or making you sad or making you angry or whatever, you can actually be re-traumatized thinking about these things that you else had suppressed or forgotten. You can also create discomfort. You can create discomfort in many different ways, but it was described that if the researcher were unexperienced, it could be difficult for them to manage 2 different perspectives or 3 or 4 in between the family members. And of course, it's a very delicate balance also in the way that you interview the different family members. You could also cause discomfort and anxiety if they were separated. Sometimes if you want to do family interviews, you either choose to have them separately and then together, or the other way around, as a family first and then separately afterwards, because you need informations that are not necessarily given in the group. But some participant would feel some level of anxiety if we separate them, because then they might think that, why are we separated? Are they talking about things that I'm not supposed to know anything about? Or are they talking about things that could harm me or could, so some people will react with anxiety. Then we have the problem with people who talk a lot and other people who does not talk too much, and how do we balance that everybody have a say? And we also, or it is also described that men and women and now non-gender people have different positions in the family, and we need to be sensible and sensitive about these power factors in the family. And then, of course, if you have a lot of people together, you can't secure anonymity for the individual. You can do it for the group, and you can say that what we're talking about here stays here, but the individual will have his or her anonymity seized. And then, of course, you will have to be aware of, do you get individual accounts or do you get shared accounts when you interview the family? And it depends on the family. So when you are all done with your interview, you have some challenges, and you also would have before you actually gathered the people you wanted to interview. Some of the things that they described was that we need to reflect on sensitive topics and how they would impact all the participants, and outline some ethical ground rules before you start the interview to try to protect each individual and say that they are only supposed to share things that they want to share and not the things that they actually keep as secrets or that they keep for themselves because they don't want to share it with others. Like the case with the ICU patient who did not want to be called him. It's of course some of the subjects that if you have a sexual orientation and your parents are not aware of it and you don't want them to be aware of it, it could pose a challenge. So how do we include the participants and how do we avoid coercion in if one of the participants actually do want to share their experiences as a family, but another family member actually does not and not feel like they want to participate, but are coerced into participation. We need to be very sensitive about that and try to find out what are the power distribution in the family. And actually, the interviewees can have a lot of differing expectations on why or why not to participate. And we need to address that as well. And you can do that in the beginning where you also discuss the ethical ground rules in making some kind of agreement of what are your expectations participating in this interview. So you can also choose an option that you have the opportunity to choose who to get interviewed with. Because if you are a youngster and you actually do not want to share your sexual orientation with your family, maybe you should be interviewed together with a peer, a good friend, somebody that could actually support you where you are. So we have to consider the subject of our research and to find out how to best choose our participants and to protect them for possible harm. And how do we protect the participant with families and when children participate? That's also a good question because children can be from very young age where they are not cognitively prepared to do interviews and to reflect on certain issues. So we always have to think about what age and how can we interview children, and of course almost I will be back to that, but mostly have the parents as gatekeepers when we interview children together with their families. But if it's a conflict-torn family, it can be very difficult for children to participate because they actually would always try to not take party for any of their parents. And therefore we should be very sensitive about how the family function is before we interview them. And then how to label relatives in reports. Some relatives does actually not want to be called caregivers. They do not want to be called certain things, and we need to address that as well. If we want to report from our interviews, we need to ask the participants, how would you prefer that we name or present you in our reports? And then there has been a lot of discussions about who is telling the truth. And the truth is, from my perspective, there is no truth, because everybody carries their own truth. And the world is, multiverse and can be seen from a lot of different perspectives. So I don't think there is a discussion about the truth. But of course, if you want a specific answer to your questions, I don't know if there is a truth out there. I don't believe so, but that was one of the things that they actually wrote about, that we as researchers can be puzzled about who is actually telling the truth. So if I collect the data and analysis, there are controversies about therapeutic and harmful effect, because some would say that to participate in a family interview, it's actually very therapeutic, because the participants are allowed to talk about things that they normally don't talk about. But others would say that it can be harmful, because you can prompt these otherwise forgotten problems or issues, and everything has to be done with a delicate balance in during the interview. We also discussed how researchers can learn the skills of striking this delicate balance between participants, because it's actually not that easy to control when you have more people in the room that you are interviewing. And then there are the gender differences, and how we ensure that people are not coerced to participate in the research. And then there are the controversies about anonymity, that you can't keep individual anonymity in a family group. So there are also controversies about planning and the planning process, because the more people you have to join, the more different is it in different schedules and working hours. And now after the COVID, we have actually begun to do a lot more research on Zoom, for example. But I did not include that in my review. The integrative review was actually very suitable because it allows you to include different research papers that are not only studies, but are also expert points of views and things like that. And the spider supported rigor, because it was actually better than using Pico small o, because that didn't capture what we were actually trying to search for because of the ethics topic. And of course, as in any other literature review, maybe we did not locate all the literature relevant for the study. So my conclusions were that it poses some specific ethical challenges, although similarities to other qualitative research methods exist, that the potential creation of, the main difference occurs on behalf of the relationship, because it's actually more about taking care of the relationship in between the participants. And therefore it's different than focus group, because focus groups are often not necessarily interrelated. Maybe they are colleagues, or maybe they're just found in the streets. But when you are working with families, they do have a relationship. So the potential creation of conflicts between participants should be given much consideration because of the possible negative impact it has on interviewees' ongoing health status, which obligates the researcher to balance delicately between the needs of the interviewees before, during, and after the joint interview. I was supported by the University of Southern Denmark and the University College Lillebælt, where I work, and I do not have any conflict of interest, not in this presentation and not in this study and not in the following updated perspectives on ethics and family research. Because we made a new search from 2017 to 2023 with a research question that was a little bit alike the other one, the former I had, was what are the ethical challenges entailed in interviewing more than one person at one time when the informants are closely related, and we searched CINAHL and focused on ethical considerations, ethical problems, and ethical challenges. And our preliminary results was 184 articles that we screened abstract, and then I extracted 24 studies with new relevant data. But in preparing this presentation, I actually excluded virtual and online data collection because it did not add up with the former study I made, and then participatory designs as well. So I found something about the researcher's role, that being a fellow human overrules the researcher's role in ethical dilemmas, that actually being a considerate, caring, loving, empathic human being is the best. And then we have to be aware of role confusion, because Taquet describes how participants can be confused in our role, that are we friends? Are we researchers? Are we therapists? And I know that's a discussion we also have had in nursing, that when we are nursing researchers, are we nurses or are we researchers? So that's a little bit in the same context. So ethics of relationships and ethics of care are very important to avoid role confusion and to have concern for the relationship. And sometimes social partners could support the researchers, giving equal voice to both partners instead of interviewing couples. And that was a little bit of what I talked about earlier on with the non-binary sexual orientation for a young teenager, that they would probably not feel comfortable being interviewed with their parents, but they would be comfortable being interviewed with their peers and their fellow friends. And then these vulnerable participants, that we have to have this continuous awareness through the process. Also when doing research with children, we have to make engaging studies, and by engaging studies, they actually mean that if we do research with children, we have to do things together with the children and try to engage them while researching because they actually relax much more and become very natural playing during the research. We also have to monitor refusal and distress, and of course partnering with parents when it makes sense, because considering research without parental consent in research among LGBT plus youth, Pickles describes why he's not searching for consent among the parents. And he explains why. And then working in a very diverse cultural setting, it should be, or it could be, and help to work together with community workers as gatekeepers. And we need to have cultural sensitivity and sometimes accept from male head of household if culture indicates it. And now I have a little case. This video is made by one of my very good colleagues in Griffith University, Elizabeth Coyne, and the video is meant as a case. They talk about a specific family situation, and my question for you guys is that I want you to discuss ethical considerations that you would have if you were to interview this family, the mother, the father, and the son, about their experiences receiving a specific genetic information. And now I will see if I can access the video. Can you still see my screen? Can you see there's a YouTube video?
Yes, Barbara, but we are seeing the PowerPoint.
Yeah, you can see the PowerPoint, so you can't see, yeah, because then I need to make a new share. Can you see it now with the Griffith University and YouTube?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Education should be focused for each consumer. It is important to tailor information for the patient and their family and take cultural aspects into consideration. So Hayley, thank you for joining me today. Are you able to tell me a little bit about what's been going on with you?
I've had to go to the doctor and get some news this week.
And what type of news did they tell you? What sort of information did they say?
It was about a genetic condition that my son has that we've just found out about, and all the things that it can cause.
And how did that make you feel? Was it bad news? Was it scary?
Yeah, it is bad news. It's very scary. It's a cancer gene. It's a condition that can cause cancer, and my son's he was only 7. And we found out that he was going to need sort of surgeries and things like that. And if the cancer spreads, it doesn't respond to treatment. So it's really quite scary.
That's a lot to take in for you. What sort of emotions were you experiencing? Were you feeling scared, thinking about the future? What sort of things were going through your head?
Yeah, really scared and overwhelmed, and a bit, I'm not sure what the word is, but I felt like it was just kind of another day in the office for them.
Yeah.
You know, they were just very matter of fact, and you know, this is what this is, and this is what it causes, and so it didn't seem to be a big deal for them. It was just, you know, they do this all the time. But for my family, that was, you know, it was huge, life-changing information.
So what do you think they could have done to sort of help give you that news in a more seamless way, make it less scary for you?
Giving me some time to process things and time to ask questions and seem interested, maybe. Yeah, they just kind of, it was like, it's just another day for them. And I didn't feel like I could ask questions. I felt like I was being a bother. Yeah, needing more information.
And being Indigenous as well, did you feel like they took any cultural considerations into the way they delivered the news to you as well?
No, I don't think so. They didn't really acknowledge it at all.
And do you think family, even having some family there, would have helped you during that point?
Absolutely. We're a very close family, and it was just me there with the doctor and the nurse.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that information with me today. That'll be useful for what we're going to be discussing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Embedding health literacy questions into your conversation enables a deeper understanding of the patient and family's health literacy levels. This ensures you can tailor information for their level and learning needs.
So the intention was that, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. The intention was that we should discuss it, but it's a bit difficult with all these people, and we do not have time for going to these specific breakout rooms. So do you have any reflections on the case and how to interview the family about their meeting with the healthcare system and getting these informations about the genetic condition?
Barbara, this is Janet. Thank you for the great presentation. I was just thinking about, it would be really good to talk to the family, the mom, about what kind of brought them to this, having to have these tests done, what had occurred, what was going on in the family, to kind of get, as we talked about in the everyday ethics conversation, just, you know, kind of getting the family story behind, you know, the story didn't start here, right? That would be one idea.
Yeah. And I have somebody who write important considerations when interviewing DIADs. Is there ever an arrangement made with social work or psychologists, for example, for post-interviews, if participants experience distress issues, or is there ever included in the proposal RRB application? The articles I read emphasized that it was important to give the participants an opportunity to get some kind of either contact information for the researcher or being what do you call that? After the interview, being asked, how are you feeling? What are your experiences? Do you have any questions? And things like that. But it was not described that there were either psychologists or social workers that could catch up with the families.
I think one ethical concern might be on the part of the researcher themselves, and that idea of trying to clarify whether they're the nurse in the situation or the researcher in the situation. And if they hear that there's someone was upset with clinical care, they may decide to act as a nurse and want to address that gap in care, but really they are in that space as a researcher to learn about those gaps in care. And since the event had passed, they couldn't do anything about that, just validate and support. But it's that idea of the researcher's kind of ethical comportment and who they are in the research interview that might be important in this type of setting.
Yeah, absolutely. Catherine Kelly is commenting that she had to do this when research divorced parents related to their caregiving of children with chronic condition, and she had a social worker on standby if needed. So that's really good. Yeah. Any other comments or questions?
I have a question not related to the film, but related to your earlier talk. It has to do with the fact that when we do joint family interviews, of course, all of the points that you've raised about balance and making sure everybody has a voice. But one of the things I'm aware of is that as a researcher, we're also looking at family dynamics. And that plays largely into our analysis. But I wonder how, if ever, this gets included in the informed consent.
I think it's important to include all the information you can, but in an understandable way, so that they can, so that they know what are we actually looking for. And analyzing, you can analyze in very different levels. And I think it's very important to also analyze family dynamics, if that is part of your research question.
It's hard for me to imagine doing a research project where you wouldn't take note of the family dynamics.
Yeah, but that's because we are systemic thinking.
Correct. But that was actually the question that came up for me, is I've never included that in my informed consents.
No.
Yeah.
But I try to explain to people how we act and interact with each other all the time, and that our actions will always have some kind of impact to the people around us. And that doing interviews with them will also give a picture of their family dynamics.
I see. That's nice. That's nice.
So trying to explain to them that we are actually interested in different levels, but trying also to make it understandable for them what we see when we talk with them.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank, I see that we're out of time. So I want to thank Dr. Woltland, who was a wonderful overview of the concerns that we have in doing family research. And thank you for updating your review of literature as well. And now I want to hand it over to Dr. Mooney Doyle, who's going to introduce Dr. Janet Dietrich.
Thank you, Dr. Chesla, and thank you, Dr. Voltelen, for your wonderful presentation. You gave us lots to think about. Well, I have the honor and the privilege of introducing our final speaker of the day, our final keynote speaker, Dr. Janet Dietrich. Dr. Dietrich is the Professor Emerita of Nursing at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, US. She's known for her expertise in family science, health equity, and participatory qualitative and mixed methods research. She developed methods to foster the inclusion of children, adolescents, and young adults and their families in research. She pioneered novel qualitative and quantitative research methods that include strategies for interviewing children, created mixed methods designed for potentially vulnerable populations, applied family typologies to nursing science. Currently, she's working with members of the survivorship team at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, the Center for Health Delivery Science at Nemours Children's Health System in the US, regarding research-based practice initiatives that include developing decision aids for adolescents and young adults diagnosed with cancer and implementing these into practice. Dr. Dietrich's present research focuses on caregivers and young adult survivors of childhood brain tumors who are living at home with their parents, regarding the challenges and decisions faced by the family as the survivor matures. She and her research team are testing web-based coach-supported interventions for caregivers called TIPS, for caregivers of young adult survivors of childhood brain tumors at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And on a personal note, Dr. Dietrich has been my mentor since my master's program, my PhD program, and continues this day to be a mentor extraordinaire and an inspiration for faculty across the world and researchers across the world. So, Dr. Dietrich, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us today.
I'm going to ask Miara if she would like to go ahead and advance the slides. Good, and I for those of you, I think I forgot to unmute my computer. I am awed to be here today being on the, I feel like I'm standing on the shoulders of so many wonderful people and so many wonderful colleagues in this group, and many of whom are here today, and I really appreciate it. All right, go ahead. I have no conflicts or disclosures of interest. Go ahead. Well, this has been kind of a long journey for me. When I completed my doctoral dissertation in 1983, my singular publication for my dissertation was really about wondering how much should children with chronic conditions be involved in their own healthcare decisions. I'm not sure how much we've progressed since this time, but I've had these many, many questions since this time. In that time, it was 1982 when the President's Commission for Healthcare Decision-Making came out. And I found, oh, wow, I'm not the only person asking these questions. But in the long run, I think we have many, many questions still unanswered, and that's what I hope to address today. Go ahead. I'm dedicating today, there's always patients and families one remembers more than others. Maybe it's something within us that we can relate to their struggles and their triumphs. At my age, there are many of these, but I'd like to dedicate this talk to Tim and his family who struggled with devastating long-term effects of childhood brain tumors. And you're going to hear from his mother, Paula, today. All right, go ahead. My objectives today are to identify some connections amongst family nursing, family ethics, moral distress, including social determinants of health. And secondly, I'm going to suggest how we can move family ethics and family nursing research, practice, and education forward. And in terms of family nursing research, this will be more about research about ethical issues. As Barbara has done a beautiful job talking about ethics of research itself. Go ahead. So I'm going to try to make these connections, which are still loose and conceptual in many respects, but I'm going to do my best to do so. Go ahead. Well, we know that family is the cornerstone of social ecology. I think we're a little biased in this degree, but we've heard so much today about the importance of family. And it's really, for me today, I want to comment about, it's really, they're at the critical intersection of the structural and intermediate determinants of health. And that this has been really talked about within family nursing now for the past really 10 years. And we've grown to incorporate application of evidence-based knowledge and practice really to promote the health of families and family members across the lifespan, and how social determinants of health influence and are influenced by families. And we have made substantial progress in terms of understanding that individuals do not exist in vacuums, and their families, regardless of their structure and definition, including both given and chosen families, play major roles in the individual's health, as our speakers have said today. All righty. Go ahead. And that family nursing recognizes that we have multiple levels of family ecology that impact the health of the individual and the family system, including their structure, processes, and outcomes. And we really mentioned all of these today by either contributing to or hindering families' capacity to achieve their social functions. And we, as we know, we ask a lot of families. We ask them to provide economic support, education, health and mental health, protection, affection, identity, and cultural socialization. All right. Go ahead. Given the important role of families in the health of individuals, it is important, therefore, to explore their own ethical concerns. And so today I'm using this study by Cho and colleagues because they did just that. And their findings provide kind of a cornerstone for this lecture. They surveyed 196 adults that described over 200 unique ethical experiences they had during hospitalization. And of interest were that many of these concerns were very similar to bioethical concerns that we read about every day. However, most of their concerns were with relational issues within their own families and with healthcare providers. Some of them occurring in the hospital and some of them outside of the hospital. And of note, their sample, well, this in fact was sort of a simple sub-study, it was a survey. It really provided, they really had a nice diverse sample. Okay, go ahead. So this is just a thumbnail sketch of all the various kind of themes these families came up with. In other words, these were not written down and listed. These were just spontaneously mentioned. All right, go ahead. So first of all, I'm going to just really look at the themes within family, tensions and disagreements. Because as family nurses, I think these are the things that we are ripe to help families with, beyond decision-making, beyond a lot of other things that we talked about today, and including what we talked about today. But so these are the kind of the 4 areas they identified. Go ahead for the next slide. The first area was family disagreements about medical care. Participants experienced family disagreements about treatment choices. So this is different than disagreements with healthcare providers. These are disagreements within the family. So the context was loved one with clear or uncertain medical decision-making capacity. I think we're more familiar with that one and a little more comfortable talking about it. And of course, half of these were about end-of-life decisions. But families have a lot of other kind of questions. How much weight should their own opinions carry if the sick person still has decisional capacity? Do I have a right to kind of force or be forceful about my ideas or opinions if I disagree with my loved one and they want to do X and they have the condition and I want them to do Y? How much should my loved ones factor into my wishes? So patient said, I don't know how much I should listen to my families. I really want to do X. And then how did you deal with family members who legally have the power to make decisions? The healthcare providers are only talking to them, and you know that perhaps there are a lot of other sides to this story that need to be heard. How do you get your voice heard if you don't have the legal decision-making right and the person does not have capacity for decision-making? All right, next slide. The next area they identified was families with harmful behaviors or families that were not seeking care. So these participants said that they were concerned about how to help loved ones who were engaged short-term or long-term in harmful behaviors. This might be substance abuse, psychiatric issues, refusals to seek care, the effects on them, the family of the caregiver. And you can see by this quote, this is a family member who's really losing a patient who's losing decisional capacity, and the loved one is trying to navigate that. And typically, you know, this is hard to put into words for somebody who isn't as familiar with all this jargon as we are as a family member. All right, go ahead. Another big area, of course, you know, we've just gone off this fabulous presentation by Barbara talking about family secrets. And, you know, there was a small number of participants who raised issues about sharing information, medical information, but we know this is very prevalent in our patient care. Sometimes family members didn't want to share information with patients about something terrible about their condition. And sometimes the patient didn't want to share information with their family members. So these are ethical concerns that families identified. You know, they wanted to protect, they didn't want to upset, they didn't want to stress, they didn't want to worry. Usually it was with a new diagnosis. You know, presentation, Barbara's talking about the cancer predisposition video. These are all typical areas. And ultimately, some people said they withheld the information, and sometimes people said they ultimately shared the information. And sometimes family members only learn about a diagnosis after the death of a loved one. And we know that that happens also. So, okay, next slide. This is something that's a kind of a no-brainer, I understand, but I think it needs to be said here in our family nursing conference, is that, you know, obviously people struggle with finding support in their family, not only if they're the caregiver or they're the family person who's ill. All right, go ahead. So looking at all those ethical concerns that were just the relational concerns that the individuals mentioned, you know, we really make assumptions about what's distressful and what's morally difficult for families. You know, we think we know, we can list our 10 things we learned about maybe, you know, way back when I was in nursing school or whatever, but we have to really think about the science of figuring out what are these concerns from the viewpoint of the family. And I think Dr. Ulrich says, clinicians may go about their day providing quality care, but without a full understanding that patients and families are experiencing uncertainties, dilemmas, and morally distressing situations. And then Verdict talked about in their work was, you know, we have this relationship with families as healthcare institutions or providers that we think that families are just supposed to be the care providers. And that if families resist that for any reason, they can provide care, they won't provide care, whatever happens in the family system, we have a lot of suspicions about them. And they're, you know, moral, we make a lot of moral judgments about them. And of course, this is also complicated by gender roles that are understood in different families and societies. Okay. So we've talked and we've mentioned moral distress a lot today, and I think that's a real theme of our time together here. And I know our colleagues in family nursing have really talked about this construct of family moral distress. And that moral distress is a psychological distress. It's causally related to a moral event, but it's not just by an individual, it's by a family group. And then there's a moral event that happens, there's distress. And, you know, moral refers obviously to what society sanction as right or acceptable. And, you know, something about the family feels that something about them or what they've done is wrong because of who they are or what they are not doing. Sometimes this is implicitly stated, sometimes it's explicitly stated or perceived by the family unit. Okay, go ahead. And our own, you know, Dr. Mimi Doyle and Dr. Ulrich have talked about parental moral distress, but I think this can be applied really across the lifespan in terms of looking at caregiving and thinking, or caregivers, however we might label them. And when they describe parental moral distress as one or more negative self-directed emotions that arise both directly and indirectly in response to a situation in which important parental role are perceived to be threatened, or their ability to act in their role is stymied. They can't do what they think they should be doing as a parent. And I think really included, very importantly included intrapersonal, interpersonal, and existential antecedents of this moral distress. So intrapersonal would be those ideas we have about ourselves and what we should be doing. And I do, my research is a lot in the area of confidence of caregivers and, you know, kind of where they get these messages about what they should be doing. And they, you know, we form these ideas within ourselves, whereas interpersonal is the impact of, you know, other family members, providers, and culture, on communication about what we should be doing. And then existential, of course, is really, you know, the why me questions. And even if we don't ask families about them, they have these thoughts and are very, 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 very important to families members. Okay, go ahead. So just sort of tie some of these things together. I want to show you a video of Tim's mother, Paula. I showed you Tim's picture in the beginning. He was diagnosed, I said, when he was a child with a brain tumor. And Paula is on our advisory board for our intervention. And I have to tell you, very sadly, Tim died recently. So this is extra poignant for me. Okay, Mara, if you don't mind showing it, just until I start talking.
And I've been to a few, the first few, you have to find the right one because they're like, well, you've been through.
Do you want to just restart the video, Miara, if you don't mind? Just, you can hear. Thank you very much.
It's a good thing for them to know. I've been to counselors just for my own self, so I'm not worried like constantly. And I've been to a few, the first few, you have to find the right one because they're like, well, you've been through a lot. What do you expect? Well, that doesn't help me any. So this last one I go as needed when I'm feeling like I'm melting down, and she gives me a lot of tools, and I think it's very, very helpful. And March was a bad month. He had a migraine every day of the month, and then they put him on a preventative medicine. Well, then that caused some side effects. So then you get coasting, and then you get comfortable, and it's like, what next? It's sort of how I live.
You have heard this mother just briefly.
Okay, you can cut it here.
Work for her.
Okay, you can go to the next slide. Right, that was from one of the modules of our intervention. We now know that the social ecological roots of problems, such as the ones we've been talking about today, can be more important in determining morbidity and mortality than many other factors. So these issues must be addressed to improve outcomes and decrease structurally determined health inequities. And this includes, by the way, racism is a primary driver of social determinants of health and our relationships with patients and families. And since we know that, health is integral to its members, our communities and societies, we know that we need to help and bolster families so that they can fulfill their functions to socialize and protect their members. And while families can be key to modifying risk of their members, they can also easily fall prey to changing social and political systems, especially families who are potentially vulnerable. Any issues that affect any parts of our our ecological worlds affect the health of families by providing protection or increasing risk. Okay, go ahead. This is a model by the World Health Organization about these structural determinants of health, but it also includes these intermediate determinants of health. And this is where family comes in, although not explicitly mentioned, unfortunately, but these include the material circumstances, the psychosocial circumstances, the behavioral and biological factors, and the health system itself. So this is really where, in the intermediate determinants, this is really where the family plays a role in either buffering or exacerbating these issues out of no fault of their own. All right, go ahead. So given all of these pieces, what can we do to move our agenda forward? I'm going to try to talk about each piece of our mission. Go ahead. First of all, we need to advocate, I think, for taking a relational perspective on ethics, which can lead to more embodied and contextualized knowledge generated through mutual respect and engagement, such as the kind of presentations that we've heard here today, versus knowledge that is generated on a non-relational assumptions about behavior. That is, family needs to be at the table when we're talking about health. And we need to reimagine, I think, our future of family nursing practice and education regarding family ethics by better understanding the perspectives of families about what they think are ethical issues and how these connections are occurring between social determinants of health, family structure and processing as an outcome, and their moral distress. Okay. In terms of clinical, I think, again, to summarize, we need to recognize both family and caregiving roles and responsibilities, as well as the role of everybody in the family, that intersectionality. We need to ask families and caregivers about family relationships and sources of conflict and support. We need to ask patients about their relationships with their families, throughout the illness trajectory. And we need to ask open-ended questions about religion, spirituality, and life philosophy, which is a standard of palliative care. And we need to show support by helping patients and families problem solve their situations. Next slide, please. In terms of research, we need to situate problems within social ecology. It's not the problem of the individual, for instance, if they don't trust us. We also need to talk about trustworthy institutions and trustworthy care teams. So we need to change our perspective. or add different pieces of social ecology. We need to advocate for families to be included in research and families either taking a primary or secondary role. We need to have expertise in our family, our research that is diverse and has not only diverse researchers, but community stakeholders, family members, but we also need people with expertise in family science and ethics and all those areas that can really make our research be responsive to society's needs. Go ahead. Our conceptual framework needs to really touch on multiple social realities of individuals and families, and even in our interventions, we need to acknowledge those. And we need to design studies to gain new insights into these issues, and really to say, what is our contribution to family nursing? Obviously, with families, we need to recruit minoritized samples and leverage secondary analyses to find out about phenomenon, and talk about universal design so we can promote inclusion of family members with chronic conditions and disabilities so they can have a voice as well, and really engage stakeholders so we can really get the most valid and reliable information as possible. Go ahead. And variables, we need to look at, demographic data. There's more than finding out about characteristics of populations are more than demographic variables. We need to really look at these as social cultural factors that influence outcomes. We need to obtain data from patients and decision makers and families and about the social context of people's lives. And we need to collect data on indicators of racism and structural inequities. I saw one suggestion recently that every research subject should be asked if they feel that they're discriminated against or receive unfair treatment in all the institutional settings that they belong to: schools, healthcare settings, community settings, stores, every place. Next slide, please. Create data collection plans that are practical and accessible for subjects. Use analytic techniques that accommodate diversity rather than disparities, and look at intra-group variability in addition to inter-group variability. And use an intersectional approach that reflects the world's complexity. Interpretations, and we need to try to provide insights on how each level of the social ecology affects and are affecting health outcomes, family and health equity. Next slide. And finally, educational implications. As we've learned so well today, we need to implement ethics education to mitigate moral distress. And this needs to be on all levels of nursing education. We need to supply safe moral spaces, as we've learned. Also did some reading on teaching emotional regulation. And this is not distancing or withdrawing from patients, that it's an ability to regulate our emotions in terms of really serving our patients best we can. And finally, to decolonize our curriculum and to provide, develop an understanding about health equity, social determinants of health, and population health, and how to incorporate these issues into practice. Next slide, please. I'm sorry I had to go so fast at the end. Well, we're almost out of time. I'd like to thank you so much for everyone's contributions to today, and to my former and current students, and to my the wonderful people who sponsored my trip to Sao Paulo, Dr. Maria Rodriguez dos Santos and Dr. Regina Slitz. I inadvertently put her old last name here on the slide. And also to my trusty travel companion, Dr. Moody Doyle, And of course, to Dr. Kathleen Knaffel, my lifelong mentor, and all my colleagues at IFNA, everything IFNA, yay. Next slide, please. And thank you, thank you for the funding from the graduate group at Sao Paulo University, and all of the things that IFNA does today.
Thank you so much, Janet. And we are just so lucky to have you close out our time together today with us. I want to just read a note to you that was posted in the chat, and others, if you have questions or comments as we close our time together, please post them in the chat. It says, "Dear Dr. Dietrich, it was a great pleasure to have you and Dr. Mooney Doyle with us this week. The inputs and suggestions you gave will be valuable in my thesis proposal. I hope you can come back to Brazil at another time." So it just goes to show that these discussions about ethics with families across practice, education, and research build on our experiences in the past and then influence the future family scholars that are in training now. So if there are any other questions or comments, please share them with us. But I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our speakers today. I'd like to thank all of the moderators and the Family Ethics Subcommittee of the Research Committee of the International Family Nursing Association, who helped make this possible and planned this event, the wonderful students at the University of Sao Paulo School of Nursing, who are working behind the scenes so hard and so long to make this happen. You are our future, so we are so happy that you are on this journey with us. The slides will be posted in the near future on the IFNA website, so be on the lookout for that. And please don't forget to complete your evaluation that was included with the Zoom reminder today. And then Dr. Cindy Bell says, "Yes, great presentations from all the presenters. Thank you to the Ethics Committee and IFNA." Cindy, you are so welcome. We hope you come join us at our conference in Dublin in June. And please be in touch with questions if anyone's interested in learning more about the good work that IFNA does. Okay, thank you all so much for attending. And here's your QR code to do your evaluation. Thank you, everyone.
People are leaving.
Okay, we see notes coming in with lots of thanks. Rosa Marie, the QR code is on the screen. Are you able to take a screenshot of it, or there is the link for the Survey Monkey?
And we can also send an email for all the participants with the link. So as soon as we finish here, we can also send by email.
Okay, thank you, Mayara. I think that might work well for some participants, so they have it in multiple places. Rosemary, there's going to be a link sent out through email for the evaluation. So please check the email that you registered for the conference. The email that you used to register for the conference, soon you will be able to find the link to do the evaluation. Yes, everyone enjoy the rest of your day. Dr. Kathy Kelly says it was a wonderful day learning with us all. It was great having you here. Thanks so much.
Yes, great. Thank you very much, Kim. Thank you very much, everyone.
You're welcome.
I think so. We can send people the email afterwards just to make sure everyone will get the link. It is very important for you to put your considerations in the evaluation. So this is the first seminar. Of course, we want to continue doing this. So it's very important for us to have your evaluation so you can keep making it better. Okay, so we are closing the seminar, and we will put the recording for this section in IFNA website. So IFNA members will have access to it. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. See you.
See you.